Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Übergabe podcast. My name is Christian. Most of you already know me, and I'm delighted that we can record another exciting episode today. Frances sends her apologies. She's feeling a bit under the weather. I'm also feeling a bit rough, but I think I'll be able to get through the show. And today we want to tackle another very exciting topic. We've talked about people from abroad quite a few times before. We last discussed it in episode 151 with Debora Aust, who is also here again today. We realized that this topic actually has a second layer, which is also very important, especially in practice. Debora will explain what this is all about in the next few minutes. But before we get started, I would like to welcome Debora. Hello, Debora.
Hello, Christian. It's great to be back.
Exactly, yes. Thank you for bringing the topic up again because we hadn't really noticed it. Perhaps you could give us a quick reminder of what today's topic is.
Today, we're trying to look at the perspective of international nursing professionals and their expectations. So that's our main focus. What does someone expect when they come to Germany to work in nursing, and what challenges and opportunities are there?
Exactly, because I want to give a little spoiler. The expectations and what you actually encounter here seem to be quite different, at least in some cases. And to make that visible and raise awareness of it, we want to revisit the topic today. But if you didn't have time or didn't feel like listening to episode 151 to get to know Debora, now you have the opportunity to find out who she is and what she does.
I run the Berlin Counselling Centre for nursing staff with foreign qualifications. That's BBeFaP for short. BBeFaP supports all nursing staff in Berlin, as well as nursing professionals who would like to come to Berlin and their employers throughout the entire process. So it's a process of recognition, immigration, but also integration. We have provided a great deal of advice since last year and are making good progress. We have also brought along one or two quotes from these consultations that give a little insight into the challenges in this area.
Exactly. We want to start again today with a few quotes so that we can enrich the discussion a little. These quotes are from nursing professionals from different countries, and we are quoting them, so to speak. We did not get them from the individuals themselves in order to protect their privacy. Debora, you brought us the first quote.
Exactly. It's from a nurse in the Philippines who told us the following. It's not always big things. Often it's just looks or the way people talk to me. Slowly, very clearly, as if I couldn't understand or was perhaps even stupid. Sometimes I'm asked if I'm properly trained. That affects you, even if it's not said out loud.
That's pretty much the point I'm making. That's just that expectations are a bit off. We have this preconception that just because these people speak a different language, they are actually considered stupid or that we are overly cautious. We will explore this topic in more detail in the next few minutes. Another issue, however, is this lack of recognition. Another nurse from Brazil also commented on this.
Exactly. She wanted to express to me how important a career is for Brazilian nursing professionals and for others as well. She said, I once applied for further training, but my German colleague got the place. I had the feeling that it was perhaps because of my German language skills, even though I am just as qualified as she is. That was very disappointing for me.
I think that's something you often encounter when you take a closer look at this area. And of course, it has something to do with discrimination, perhaps even racism. But it is also a huge obstacle to successful integration, especially into the healthcare system and the working world, but also into our society as a whole. And I find that very telling in many ways in terms of the issues we are discussing. Another nurse, also from Brazil, expressed further emotions.
Exactly. That coincides with a lot of comments. We just picked someone else from Brazil, but this comment coincides with many other nursing professionals because it's really a general challenge for someone who comes to Germany or Berlin. She says that at the beginning, you get a lot of support to even get to Germany. But as soon as you're here, you feel completely abandoned. The challenges on the ground are huge, and there are moments when you feel completely overwhelmed.
We discussed this as a little bit in the first part of the podcast in episode 151. For example, you talked about how these people are at work, so to speak, and have social contacts there. But when they leave work, they are often alone and lonely. I think that reflects what you're saying here a little bit.
Absolutely, exactly. So here too, there is the challenge of being able to cope with so many challenges happening at the same time. A Mexican professional in particular mentioned this, especially when family is either far away and you are emotionally attached to them, or perhaps you have come with children and have to manage your family and children at the same time as your work. I think many nursing professionals in Germany are also familiar with the challenge of balancing work and family life.
Now, of course, the most pressing question is, what does all this actually have to do with the BFaP, or to what extent does the BFaP play such a central role here?
So, especially from the last quote, where can support be provided? It is certainly true that nursing professionals who come to us from other countries receive greater support with immigration, visas, etc., until they arrive here. And then it depends very much on the size of the institution where they are taken in and how much support they receive after that. As standard, everyone has to go through the recognition process. Foreign qualifications have to be recognized here in Berlin, and that requires a lot of support and help because so many skilled workers are overwhelmed by the processes and paperwork involved. And then, of course, there's more. They have to get to know the institution, and BFaP is also there to provide support, to clarify and show where support is available. One example is a mentoring system. Language is always a very, very, very big issue. As BFaP, we support the employing institutions in finding suitable language courses, either on site or online, although we have received feedback that online courses are not so popular among international nursing professionals. They would prefer something on site because, of course, this allows them to make connections again. In language courses, people can get to know each other and perhaps discuss common problems. Other issues we deal with at the Counselling Centre in Berlin include integration management, which is a big topic, i.e. how institutions can establish good integration management, training in intercultural competence, which we will probably come back to later, and a very important topic. And then there are questions about residence, family reunification, government agencies, bank accounts, living in Berlin, which is a very serious problem. Exactly. We try to provide support in all these areas and at the same time raise awareness among the institutions.
At the beginning, we heard a few sound bites that also touched on the issue of language, but your focus is in Berlin. And I'm wondering, what is the current situation for international nursing professionals in Berlin? Because it's completely normal in Berlin for everything to be very multicultural, and it's actually part of the normal picture. So you wouldn't expect there to be any problems, right?
The bigger, the more difficult, I would say. The first major situation we have in Berlin is precisely that you get lost in a big city. And in our counseling sessions, we repeatedly receive inquiries from nursing professionals who already live in Berlin and are looking for an employer, partly to complete their recognition process or because they have already completed it but were not happy, or because they came to Berlin with a partner and now, after several years, think it would be nice to return to work. And we simply find that many institutions focus more on international recruitment instead of exploiting this potential and looking at what is already available in Berlin, who they could work well with or what fits in with the existing staff. The big advantage of people living in Berlin is that they don't have to worry about finding accommodation, as they usually already have a place to live and have already gone through a certain integration phase. Language is always a challenge, but here we can say we are trying to improve the matching process. At the moment, we do this more or less manually so that we know which employers are looking for whom, and when skilled workers come to us, we try to place them. But it would be nice if institutions would also focus on the potential that Berlin has to offer, which has many advantages. The second challenge, which is of course present in Berlin, but probably nationwide, is recognition. On the one hand, there is the formal recognition, i.e. how do I get confirmation from Lageso that I have a work permit and am allowed to work.
Could you briefly explain what the Lageso is?
Lageso is the State Office for Health and Social Affairs. It is the institution and authority in Berlin that recognizes nursing and medical professions and issues professional licenses on the basis of documents. Exactly. So, on the one hand, there's the formal side, which is actually fine. Once the documents are all together, it works well. But along with this recognition comes, of course, what I would call social or team recognition. I join a team and many employees or colleagues don't know what I did in my home country. Do I have a bachelor's degree? Am I an academic? Or did I just do vocational training? I'm not recognized yet. That means I work more as a nursing assistant and my German isn't very good. And then you often hear comments like the ones we heard at the beginning that your German skills are used to judge your ability. That's very frustrating when you're suddenly told you can't do anything, even though you just can't express yourself well enough in German. I always imagine how good I would be at my job if I had to explain what I can do in Finnish or Chinese. And then I think, well, I would probably also be at my wit's end and wouldn't know how to do it, even if I knew a few Finnish or Chinese words. So in that sense, it's a really big challenge that requires a lot of empathy and understanding on both sides. And that's something we're trying to work on. Another point that is mentioned by many skilled workers, because it is related to their motivation to come to Germany in the first place, is career prospects. Many skilled workers say that they are more likely to go to Germany because they want a better life for their children, because they want a good job and a good career for themselves. And money plays a role in that, of course. That's logical. And there is often a lack of visible career paths. Regardless of whether I work in a large institution or a small one, it is simply difficult for nursing staff to see where they can go. So will I remain a nursing assistant forever, or are there career opportunities? Could I perhaps become a practical instructor or practical trainer? Or is there even a nursing department manager position available, or whatever? In other words, a clearer career path. And then the last issue or point that concerns me, I would say, is, of course, stereotypes and prejudices. You touched on that a little earlier. Many nursing professionals feel that they are not properly understood. On the one hand, this is due to a lack of knowledge about the training pathway and the cultural and communication backgrounds that people bring with them. Every country and every culture communicates differently and trains differently. And if the team that takes people on here doesn't know much about how things are done in their home country, then it becomes difficult. This leads to misunderstandings and so on. But it's also important to note, and I didn't actually know this, I wasn't really aware of it, that nursing professionals who arrive here also come from very homogeneous teams. This means that if I am a Mexican nurse, I usually live or work in Mexico in a very homogeneous nursing team. And I come here and naturally assume, because no one ever tells me otherwise, that the teams here are entirely German and that I am essentially joining them as a Mexican nurse. However, I am not aware that in addition to myself from Mexico, there may also be Brazilian, Filipino, Ukrainian, Albanian, and other team members. And as a result, it's a cheerful mix that I probably never expected and haven't learned to deal with. So this international team structure must also be learned on the part of the international nursing professionals. So there's still a lot going on. There's still a lot in motion.
From what you're saying, language seems to be very important. That means that having a good language course is really important, right? That's how I understand it for now.
Exactly. That's certainly the case. You can't do it without language. Every international nursing professional who comes to us must have B1. And for recognition, i.e. to obtain a professional license, you need B2. B2 is actually very good German. Of course, it still matters whether it's nursing German or whether it's bus stops, cauliflower and other things. And it's good that we have the nursing language exam in Berlin. That means it focuses on nursing language and not on general language, which is what is tested in the Goethe test, for example. It's great that we can offer that in Berlin.
Here's a slightly critical question. Do you observe any problems related to origin? For example, do Mexican nursing professionals have fewer problems and perhaps face less prejudice than people from the Philippines or India or similar countries?
No, I wouldn't single out a particular culture or region. Definitely not. It often has to do with ignorance about where people come from, i.e. the team that's there. And here again, the team that is there is never only German or only of German origin or only with German as their mother tongue, but it is to a certain extent a diverse team, as you said, multicultural in Berlin and so on. So that means that the teams are a bit mixed. And of course, many of them don't know how nursing works in the Philippines or how nursing works in Albania. And that leads to greater misunderstandings and expectations, of course. So when a team is overworked because there are too few people, too much work and so on, and then someone new joins and the team hopes, because they haven't communicated properly beforehand, because the induction wasn't good, etc., they hope for support and quick training so that the overload can finally be reduced. And then someone comes along who doesn't speak German very well yet. And then they say, yes, but didn't you learn that? Can't you do that? So what are we paying you for? Instead of clarifying these things up front, especially at recruitment companies, who is coming, what is their background, and what do they want?
Yes, I asked because I can imagine, because I would clearly observe this in myself, that I feel more caught out when it comes to the question of competence, that if it's a person from a Western country, for example, I would tend to attribute competence to them rather than from a country I am less familiar with. So it has nothing to do with whether it's Western countries or Eastern countries or anything like that. But I always think, as you say, it has to do with complete ignorance about how education works in Albania, for example, because we are not confronted with that system. We always think that America is somehow a perfect world, and Sweden too, and somehow the Netherlands as well. That means that if people come from these countries, I might even feel a kind of humility. Oh, now this person is coming here from America and has no idea, and they're going to show me up or something. But of course, that's not the case. At the same time, though, I don't know anything about Albania or India, and that's why I have these preconceptions that, yes, they're perhaps poorer countries and things can't be any better there, and that's why they can't do anything here and so on, and that's why they all want to come here. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly, absolutely. But I think if someone from India came to you and explained what needs to be done in this care situation in more or less good English, you'd say, oh, okay. Maybe at first there would be some surprise. I didn't expect that. But it would quickly turn into, oh, cool, okay, this person can explain to me what they have to do, and that's right, and that's good, and so on. Because maybe they spent 3 years at university studying nursing. And I think there's a lot that comes with the language. Like, how well can I express myself? How well do I know the technical terms? And then there's a second bigger challenge, of course, which is how well the person who comes in understands our care system, our everyday care routine. And everyday care looks different in different facilities, of course. So we're talking about long-term care. We're talking about intensive care. What kind of care are we talking about? These are very different job profiles. And if I come from India and have studied intensive care and perhaps also have experience in this field, and I'm then employed here in long-term care, then the expectations I had as an Indian nurse are rightly not met. And on the other hand, I am naturally disappointed because the support is sought for long-term care. So I have capacities and skills that do not fit what I would ultimately have to do.
I'll come back to that in a moment. I just have a vague idea that it might also be useful to inform the people who work in nursing here, i.e. those who speak German, about the countries where the new recruits come from, or the countries where the people who are working there come from, and to find out about the conditions there, for example, in the healthcare system, what the training is like there, just to build bridges and perhaps also to gain an understanding that you are not always superior or ahead of these people, so that you can simply knock down these prejudices and also know, okay, wow, she actually did a year longer and also has a bachelor's degree, for example, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely, yes, exactly. We often summarize this in integration management or further training for intercultural competence. This doesn't just include understanding how someone from a different cultural context communicates and behaves, but also what the education system is like in Albania, for example, or the nursing training system in Peru, and what that means. What do they do similarly to us or even identically? Where are they stronger, or what do they do more intensively? And perhaps also, yes, where are the gaps, and address them clearly and openly instead of always saying, well, maybe there's still a little something missing. Yes, so that we can also recognize that we are missing a lot, but it's just different. And that language doesn't tip the scales and mean that if you can't say it right, then you're not good enough or you don't have experience. Instead, it should be based on knowledge, not assumptions. Absolutely. And there's a lot of room for improvement, both in terms of intercultural understanding and in terms of understanding where people come from and what their professional backgrounds are. And I think it will dispel a lot of expectations and frustration.
But probably the same is true the other way around. I can tell you a story. For example, we were recruiting for advanced practice nursing, and there was one person who had trained in Germany and then moved to England. In England, you're allowed to do a lot more than here in Germany. And this person said, I found it a bit strange when I was suddenly allowed to prescribe medication. So now I'm responsible for it. And something could happen that has a lot to do with pressure. And in other countries, that's completely normal. So that means that the way we work here couldn't just start working in a different system overnight. And then you could just say, sorry, if you don't feel confident prescribing medication anymore, then you're just lacking the skills.
Absolutely. Yes, of course. The problem is simply that the situation is not like that. It's just not the case. It's difficult to say to someone, imagine you were to go to Brazil and be a nurse there. That person would reply, I'm not, I don't want to, I won't do it. And from that point of view, what you're saying is true, but it doesn't help to generate more understanding. What I see as a big problem is that many international nursing professionals don't get clear information about where they're going to end up. As I said before, there are different nursing professions or different wards in the facilities where you can end up, and that's not communicated to them or only very, very poorly.
How is it possible that nursing professionals from abroad who are trained in intensive care somehow end up in long-term care?
For efficiency reasons, many recruitment companies and service providers have started to use a system known as pooling. This means that they are established in one country, let's take India as an example, and have a program where they select accredited nursing professionals from the population and ask them if they are interested in working in Germany or Berlin. Those who say yes, they'll do it, then take the B1 course and learn German up to B1 level, and then they form a pool. And then, of course, institutions in Germany, in Berlin, are contacted and asked if they are interested in Indian nursing staff at B1 level. And the institutions say, it could be a long-term care facility, but it could also be a hospital or a clinic. It could be different. And then they look through this pool and say, okay, we'll take you, introduce yourself to employer X, Y, etc. But very little is asked about what the Indian nurse wants. Would they like to continue working in intensive care? Would they like to say, no, I don't really like that. It just happened that way. I have a bachelor's degree, but I'd actually like to work with elderly people or whatever. That's not asked. And that means you are simply assigned because it would be far too much effort. That would be matching, which is too intensive and therefore too expensive. It would mean waiting until a long-term care facility in Berlin says, as for example, that it would like 3 Indian nursing assistants or nursing professionals. Then you would actively go out and probably have to organize 5 to 7 people and get them all up to B1 level. Then you would see if they are a good match, because not every person fits into every institution. We know this from job interviews. Not everyone who applies and has the qualifications is a good fit for the team. So, of course, there is a certain selection process, I would say. And once the 3 have been selected, you would go through the immigration process with them. But that would be a very meticulous matching process, which nobody does on a large scale anymore these days. This means that the nursing professionals from India don't actually know whether they will end up in Bavaria, Berlin, or somewhere else. They don't know whether they will be working in long-term care or in intensive care. They all want to work in a hospital because that's what they know. And that's where they see career opportunities. In a hospital, in a large organization, you naturally have more opportunities for advancement and career development, and perhaps also the chance to find like-minded people who are in the same situation as you, rather than in a small long-term care facility. And that's one thing. The other thing is that they don't understand it. In India, basic care and elderly care is often provided by the family. In multi-generational households, people live with their parents, sometimes their grandparents and aunts and uncles. That means the family looks after the care themselves. It's completely different here. So the idea that someone has chosen nursing as their dream job and at the same time thinks, okay, caring for elderly people is a huge difference if I'm not familiar with the concept. And that's not communicated, and the expectations are totally different.
Now that you mention it, I think it actually has to be that way. First of all, it's totally unfair to the people who come here. That's one thing. And secondly, it leads to them not knowing what to expect. It's a black box, but it leads to them being discriminated against, exposed to prejudice, and so on. And that naturally chips away a little at their self-esteem and in the long run at their desire to work at all, and so on and so forth. And of course, at their interest in staying in this profession or in Germany. So maybe they end up going back or deciding on a different profession somehow. This means that you could probably even reduce the turnover rate a little if you paid more attention to how these people want to work. That would actually make a lot of sense.
Logical, exactly, absolutely. So if you look at the figures, how many people have quit internally, how many are depressed or homesick, saying, I didn't see it like this, I don't understand it. And on top of that, there's the whole mess of, I need recognition, I have to register with the authorities, I need a bank account, I have to learn the language, etc. I didn't know that, and it's not what I want. So you could prevent a lot of frustration in advance if you asked people about their expectations. And again, make it clear to many institutions that they need to look even more closely and more transparently at who they are recruiting, and not just leave it to recruitment companies which are not standardized in our country, but simply think, yes, they'll do it somehow. But somehow it doesn't happen.
Yes, okay. You just said basic care, which they also have to learn. So they probably do the nursing tasks in the family, so to speak. And here in Germany, we have basically separated basic care and treatment care. That means basic care tasks such as personal hygiene or similar things. And then there's treatment care, which is actual nursing tasks prescribed by a doctor, because it's paid for from different sources, so to speak. You have to understand that there are fundamentally different aspects to care.
Exactly, absolutely. And that makes a big difference. Of course, you said earlier that it hurts your ego or your self-esteem. And of course it does when in one country basic care, i.e. personal hygiene, washing, etc., is the responsibility of the family, and the nursing professional is actually above them, i.e. is actually more respected because they don't do these tasks, but are better trained to perform other skills that a family cannot do. And then here, with all the integration measures that they have to do anyway, they are reduced to saying, yes, during the recognition process, you can only do this or almost only this. Then, of course, she is reminded of this internal understanding of levels from home, where she then says, yes, okay, but now I've actually been demoted to a family member and have to wait until I've been recognized after a year before I can do that. So those are big hurdles to overcome.
Yes, although you have to learn that it makes sense to do basic care tasks as a nursing professional because they go hand in hand with other tasks. For example, I communicate with patients or people in need of care. I have the opportunity to learn more, for example, about biographical work and similar things. But I also have the opportunity to observe skin conditions as part of my basic care duties. There are lots of these, so it makes sense to do it. It doesn't mean that you are less qualified, but you have to understand it. And I think that's a big key and probably falls flat in the end, depending on who trains you or who teaches you. So, of course, it depends on how important you consider basic care activities, i.e. SGBF services, to be.
Exactly. And that's where language comes into play again. Of course, you're absolutely right. I get to know a patient or an elderly person much better when I can talk to them during basic care. But I have to learn that too. It doesn't come naturally from day one, of course.
That brings me to the question of responsibility. What responsibility does an agency, or perhaps even the employer or the institution recruiting, have to ensure that these expectations are met? You can't just bring people in from somewhere and throw them in at the deep end and say, all right, well, let's get started.
Yes, as I already mentioned, unfortunately, we don't have any standards for recruitment in Germany. There are no standards that they have to adhere to, except for the Fair Recruitment in Care seal of approval, which does exist. And I would really recommend that all institutions that are interested take a look at the link in the show notes. I would strongly advise every institution to only work with institutions that have been awarded the seal of approval when recruiting, because they have to meet a minimum standard in order to receive this seal of approval. That's one thing. The other is just like everywhere else in human resources management. Human resources management involves dealing with people. That means I have to start seeing them not as specialists, as you said in the preliminary discussion, but as people. Someone is coming to join the team and I need to know who they are. I need to know the conditions under which the recruitment agency recruits, and also clearly present a portfolio, for example, explaining what the job involves at our company. Or with today's technology, a lot is already possible. In addition to a simple profile describing what the daily work involves, we could also say that we'll take a tour, take an iPad with us, walk through the facility, or make a video and post it on the website to ensure transparent communication. And to say, okay, if you work for us, this is what it will look like. This is what the rooms look like. This is what the team looks like. This is what your day looks like. This is how we keep records. In my opinion, the facilities in Berlin are still not going far enough. They need to be much more transparent and provide many more examples. Today with Instagram, TikTok and the like, it's really not difficult to say, okay, this is who we are. Make a short video about our everyday work. Influencers are used in various facilities. There are tons of influencers who show very nicely what the working world is like in long-term care versus hospital care, etc. So here the responsibility really lies with the employing institutions to make their side more transparent and not just say, yes, the recruitment agency showed a PowerPoint presentation to the skilled workers who know where they're going.
Are you arguing in favor of addressing the issue in a professional and appreciative manner using new types of media, but at the same time providing insights into the respective institutions and the working world?
Exactly. Well, I think with insights, because we're mostly talking about younger nursing professionals here in their mid-20s to mid-30s. That means social media is no longer a novelty and they're familiar with it, but they know what followers are, etc. So that means You can really present information transparently and get it across without having to read it out stiffly from a sheet of paper or something. And I think that goes down really well. And if after that, the nursing professional still says, yes, I've now understood that, but I understood it differently, then that's fine. That's how it is. Like when I was little, I wanted to be a doctor and never thought I'd have to study. And that's how it is. When I was little, I wanted to be a doctor and never thought I'd have to study for 8 years to do that. So I admit that the image in your head isn't always the reality, but we need to do much more to show that openly.
Although it must also be said that a nurse in Germany, for example, has also completed 8 years of training and study with a master's degree. So you're not less qualified. You just have to realize that sometimes.
I also think we need to fly the flag for those who have work experience. In some cases, yes, someone who has just finished their bachelor's degree versus someone who has a lot of experience. But I think we also need to get away from this idea that we have to compare ourselves. Who has how many years of experience, who has which bachelor's degree, am I an academic or a trained person? In the end, it doesn't matter, because in a team, it's important that we can all use our skills perfectly. I actually need everything. And that's so far away from competition and more towards taking what you offer and making something good out of it. And that's what I find lacking. It's still a bit far from expectations, but you mentioned appreciation earlier, and I find that extremely lacking in many institutions, that the management, the leadership simply says much more. I want to know what skills you have. Now, away from traditional nursing skills, technical skills, but what else can you do? For example, someone who has worked with young people in India for a very, very long time, the perfect basis for practical instruction. Yes, why don't we take that? Why do we then somehow go through a strange process or never ask people who would like to do it? Yes, so we're not really using the potential we have at all.
Yes, you've expressed a noble thought, but I think we're still relatively far away from that. If we look at our own profession in nursing, it probably works quite well. But we mustn't forget that in hospitals in particular, we deal with different professions, especially medicine, of course. And I think that the length of training and whether you studied or not also plays a role. So I don't think you can look at it in isolation. And within the profession, we also have this turf war. Or you studied, so what can you do better now? We all have to learn that it's not about whether you can do things better, but how we can complement each other to achieve the best possible outcome for the patient here. I think if you think like that, it works well, but you can't let this better or worse thinking come to the fore, but it's always there. I think we need a few more years to get on this track. Yes, and it becomes more multidimensional.
You're absolutely right, but it's becoming multidimensional. It's not just one type of training versus another, years of experience versus other years of experience, but it goes even further than that. More and more people are coming from different backgrounds, different cultures, different language groups. Is one language better than another? Does that help me more than this? We have to stop making these comparisons all the time, because it doesn't help us to realize the full potential of diversity. Instead, it keeps bringing us back to these prejudices. They can do it better or they can do it less well. And I think that if we could take this step, resolve this competition both within the industry and in terms of diversity, or if we could start talking about the need to resolve it, we would be able to exploit the potential more. But you're absolutely right. That's a nice dream of mine.
Yes. Exactly. But it's nice to be able to think that. And I always think that if it's conceivable, it's possible. And that brings me back to the topic of diversity. This intercultural competence is not just something we have to learn because other cultures are coming to us, but it also has to be learnable for the other side, so to speak. Why is it so important that both sides acquire these intercultural skills from each other?
Because intercultural competence is not something we are born with. No one is. That means it's not a skill we simply have from the outset. We have to learn it. And the more diverse of our teams and our environment become, the more we are compelled to learn it. And it doesn't matter whether I come from Mexico, South Africa, or Germany and Berlin, I have to learn it. And in many intercultural training courses I have done, especially in nursing, I have noticed that many host teams always said, why do we always have to learn something? We who are here have to learn this for those who are coming. That's wrong. No, everyone has to learn it. Everyone, and actually even beyond nursing. So the whole society has to learn to deal with this diversity. And I can't do that by just going to a one-day course and thinking about what cultural baggage I carry and how it works elsewhere and so on. It's a process that we go through again and again. And the more we are exposed to it, the better we get at it. It's like typing on a computer keyboard. At the beginning, when you first get a keyboard, you use the finger pointing method to find the letter you need, right? And now if you do it over and over again, at some point you end up using the 10-finger system. And in the end, it's exactly the same. So we have to use it again and again and reflect on it again and again in order to get better. As I said earlier, it's just as difficult for international nursing professionals who often work in purely homogeneous or almost homogeneous teams in their own countries to suddenly work in a diverse team in Germany as it is for those who are here. So the problem is actually the same for everyone.
Do you have any best practice examples? In other words, what training courses or formats could work particularly well in practice?
Well, basically, every institution has continuing education programs, i.e. a cycle of technical and standard training courses, and intercultural skills must be part of that. It's not a case of let's do it now if we don't have anything better to do, but rather something like occupational health and safety. Every year you have to do occupational safety training, and every year you should do some intercultural competence training, whether that's communication, conflict, or something else, it doesn't matter. But it needs to be institutionalized so that everyone goes through training every year. That's the be-all and end-all, in my opinion. Unfortunately, there is no standard. So you can't just go and say, I would like to have intercultural training or intercultural competence training for nursing, as is now possible with language courses, for example. This means that as an institution or as an HR department responsible for staff training, I am left to my own devices, so to speak, to find a good training course that suits us. As a counseling center in Berlin, we help with the search. So for those who are in Berlin, they can approach us and say, okay, what would be good? But it's something that needs to be standardized across institutions and not just on a voluntary basis.
Okay, you mentioned earlier that that online training courses are not really the gold standard because they lack the personal contact, at least when it comes to language courses. Would you say the same for intercultural training?
Absolutely, exactly. It's incredibly difficult to learn intercultural skills when I only have a screen in front of me. It's often about getting into certain situations, whether that's through role-playing, reflection in a group, or interaction with others, so that you can say, okay, I've never seen that before, or that's how it works. I try to use language or simple language. It's often about getting into certain situations, whether that's through role-playing, reflection in a group, or interaction with others, so that you can say, okay, I've never seen that before, or that's how it works. I try to use language or simple language. How difficult it is to find the right words. I can only do that if I can practice with someone. And doing that on screen is, I'll say it bluntly, emotionless. So in that sense, the learning effect is not the same. And everyone we spoke to said that if they had the choice between online and face-to-face was the clear winner.
Okay. It's also an issue not just for you at the counseling center, but there are many other players involved. And in the end, of course, it has to take place on the ward or in the residential area or wherever that person works or where it is supposed to take place, i.e. locally. So that's where the worlds collide, so to speak. What role do leaders play here in creating a climate that is truly geared towards diversity and where people can simply feel comfortable?
Funny you should mention that. The week before last, I was at a clinic in Hamburg. The head of human resources, nursing and patient management called all the managers together and said we were going to have a day where we would only talk about intercultural competence and diversity in hospitals in order to train these skills and raise awareness among everyone. I thought it was a really cool idea and it was a great day. I was asked to moderate the discussion. So I saw what the difference it makes when the top management of an organization says that this is important to them. It's not a marginal issue. It's important to us. We want this. We're investing in it, but we also want you to get involved and not just us up here doing something like we're entertaining everyone with a nice day out. No, it's really mandatory. You have to be there. You have to participate. It's expected of you. It's also part of the active workplace management team's job description. How can I put it? It permeates everything. That means that as a manager, I can't just dismiss it and say, okay, I'll do it when I have time. I never have time, so I never do it. Instead, I have to take care of it, just like I take care of ordering materials or that I hold a staff appraisal meeting. That is part of my daily management work. And from there, it kind of trickles down or flows down. Of course, the top-down approach, not always the best, but necessary in this case. So that means management decides and breaks it down. Another great example that I'm really proud of is a care facility in Frankfurt-Oder that is now setting up integration management and doesn't have many international nursing professionals yet. There are some Polish and a few Ukrainian nurses, but really very few for 120 employees who work in nursing and long-term care at home. And they have actively set out and said, okay, we want this, we're going to do this, we're going to prepare for it, and everyone has to get on board. And they have a whole program over a year, which we are doing together with them so that it's not just a concept that ends up in a drawer, but something that is developed together with everyone and then implemented. And that's exactly what this integration management is all about. It's not just for the international employees who may come here, but it's actually for the good of everyone, because everyone has skills that can be put to good use in a diverse team. And I think it's great that they've taken the plunge and dared to embark on this journey.
When we last spoke, I also asked whether there were any problems in the political context. Has that changed? At the time, you said no, not really, but we've now had an election. The xenophobic side here in Germany has grown a little stronger, especially in the new federal states. Are there any major problems, or is it perhaps more of a stumbling block to open up a little to the international community? Asylum applications are probably not going to be an issue now. We had that last time, these differences between asylum and regulated recruitment, but are there any issues that come to mind?
Well, I think there are significant differences between federal states and even between regions. Speaking for Berlin, I actually think Berlin is very positive in this regard, especially with the creation of the BBeFaP, the Counselling Centre, which is, of course, a very strong signal that we know we need international nursing professionals, we value them and we want to integrate them. It's more about being able to clearly demonstrate the transparency of the process, or helping institutions to get started and find measures that work. From that perspective, I actually see a positive movement, especially from the political side. I know Brandenburg very well because I lived there for a long time and things have become more difficult there politically anyway, but that has always been the case. But especially when it comes to the integration of international people. And now it's not just nursing, but international people in general. Of course, it's difficult. The reputation has suffered extremely so, even internationally. So international people are also considering which federal states they want to go to. And if they are more right-wing, that becomes difficult. On the other hand, we have employers and employer organizations that urgently need staff. But it's more difficult when people say, I'm not going there, I'm not doing it. And that's why I find it all the more remarkable that this long-standing institution is saying, okay, we're going to go ahead and do it, because ultimately that's the only way to set an example, to say it works, we want this, we're going to do it, we have to because someone has to. That's just the way it is. But yes, it's difficult.
I came back to the question because you mentioned Frankfurt an der Oder, which is on the Polish border. And I think it's a good sign that one institution, there will be several, of course, stands out because it's taken the initiative and saying, okay, we want this here too. And what I always suspect is that as an institution, you might make yourself unpopular because the community around you notices. And of course, it's much harder to recruit staff because, as you say, there are people who say, no, I don't want to go there because I'm not doing well and I don't know what my future will look like. So who knows what it will be like here in 4 years. That's why it's all the more remarkable, but probably also much more difficult for this institution than it might be here in Lower Saxony, for example.
Absolutely, exactly. Or in Berlin. And that's why Brandenburg has such a big problem. Although people live in Brandenburg, they all want to work in Berlin because, let's face it, they want their children to grow up in a more diverse environment than they can find in the furthest corner of Brandenburg. And of course, institutions are also struggling with this. And then it's a large state, which makes it even more difficult. In other words, it's already struggling with infrastructure and location problems. And then this comes on top of that. That's why I find it all the more remarkable. I think it's the only way. It's the only way to say either we go under or we open ourselves up to this process, even if it's painful and difficult. But we're doing it now and seeing what comes of it. I think many people will be surprised in the end when they see that we are approaching it sensitively and not coming in with a sledgehammer and saying, now you all have to do this, but rather taking into account the needs of the host teams and the structure that many will say, actually, it wasn't so bad. It helps us. It makes our team stronger. It improves our structures. It also makes our work easier. We communicate better with each other. It's clearer where we're going, what we want, and how it works. And I think that needs to be emphasized. It's not so much about international and national. It's about creating structures for everyone so that working in care improves.
Exactly. And I think you realize that the image of the evil foreigner doesn't exist when you suddenly start working with these people. It's not necessarily how it's always portrayed. It's okay to have that experience.
Absolutely.
Exactly. At the very beginning, we actually had this issue, and I think it's one of the things that bothers me the most, the language level when it's a bit lower, meaning that this language barrier leads to me being perceived as lacking professional competence. I actually saw a study recently that confirmed this, and I find it quite cruel, but can you briefly explain the context again?
So ultimately, language is essential in nursing. Now, it's not just about how to correctly pronounce technical terms in nursing and everyday work, but also, of course, about small talk. How can I communicate with the residents in a facility, with the patients, but also with their relatives? They still play a big role in this construct. How can I express myself? And if out of embarrassment or because I often can't find the right word or something, then of course the residents, but perhaps also their relatives will think, she can't do anything or he can't do anything because they can't express themselves. I had a funny conversation with a German nurse who went to Bern, Switzerland and worked there for 5 years. She said she was terrified of the telephone. She didn't answer the phone because she thought she wouldn't understand what was being said. They mostly spoke Swiss German, Bernese German, or French, and she didn't want to hear any values, blood values, or anything like that over the phone and then not understand them and write down the wrong medication because she didn't understand the blood values. And she said, I spent a year tiptoeing around that telephone. I always made sure someone was there so I didn't have to answer the phone. Now we're actually talking about two German-speaking countries that are almost the same in terms of qualifications. So I would say that the nurses in Switzerland are not quite the same as in Germany, but there are no major differences, not even in terms of language. I'm Swiss, so we can all speak standard German so that people understand us, but she didn't have the courage to say, could you perhaps speak standard German so that I can get the readings right? She didn't have the courage.
Why should she? I know exactly how that feels. I had exactly the same thing. I was supposed to do a workshop for the ZHAW, I think it was in Bern, and we had a meeting and the person said, also a Swiss woman, I can speak standard German, but let's try it this way. And if you don't understand me, let me know. Debora, you don't seriously believe that I said, I don't understand, sorry, can you somehow? I didn't do that. I left the meeting. I didn't understand anything. Nothing. I had to follow up afterwards.
And it's the same for everyone. And it's also the case for many of us. I've spoken to Mexican nursing professionals who said that talking on the phone is a nightmare. It's pure horror. I have no facial expressions. I have no objects that I could use. I have no environment that could help me understand what is meant. I only have the voice on the phone. This shows that we are all cut from the same cloth and we all have the same inhibitions, the same problems when it comes to not being able to speak well. Just because someone doesn't know how to use the phone doesn't mean they can't read the numbers or choose the right medication for those numbers. But they panic when they see the phone, and I think that requires a lot more understanding. I'll say it again, intercultural competence is essential. We have to understand how we tick and how others tick, and also understand that there is no difference. Now, you and I have the same problems as a Mexican, Filipino, or whatever nurse. We have to lower our inhibitions and say, okay, maybe in the first 6 months, don't make phone calls or video calls or whatever. Use a fax to send the readings and an email or whatever.
That could certainly help to change this perception to some extent. But I wonder how these skills can still be made visible. If someone doesn't answer the phone, they obviously have to tell me that they don't dare to answer the phone. But that still doesn't tell me what skills they have. How can we still make these skills visible if there is a linguistic gap, but on a different level? If I can put it that way.
I think they reveal themselves. If we remove the language filter, the other thing is trust. So the person, because you said they have to tell me that they don't like something or that they can't do it yet. But in order to be able to say that, I need trust. And we've had good experiences with mentoring systems or buddy systems or whatever you want to call them, support systems, not just technically in the sense of, okay, I get a practical instructor at my bedside and I practice certain situations at the bedside, but also in the processes, or where I can say in the evening, I'll send a quick WhatsApp message or make a quick WhatsApp call and say, I didn't understand what I have to do here and there. Can someone help me? Establishing support structures to break down inhibitions and build trust. And then it becomes very clear that the capacities and skills are all there in the background. These are trained professionals after all. So from that point of view, it becomes apparent when the initial confusion clears. But for that to happen, the institution has to establish these mechanisms.
And that is certainly also a key factor in keeping the person in the company in the long term, so to speak.
Absolutely, in addition to all the social aspects that are also necessary. What also helps, of course, is when institutions organize a day where all newcomers can meet. In Hamburg, they call it Expat Day. So everyone who isn't from Germany gets together on one day and there's a barbecue and I don't know what else they do, but ultimately it's about creating connections so that people can support each other.
Okay. You mentioned careers a little earlier, and I'm wondering what role aspects such as further training play. Of course, you first have to know what skills you need, i.e. where we are building on. So, as you say, there has to be a level where people can look ahead and say, I like it here, I want to stay here, and I want to pursue further career paths. But there also have to be family-friendly options. For example, these people may not come here with a family at first, but to what extent can family-friendly offers also make people feel a little more comfortable here and help them integrate better?
Exactly. So when you talk about family, that's an important aspect because most of them still have their families in their country of origin and naturally want to bring them over at some point. But they often have very clear ideas about where their children should go to school, whether it should be an international school or a local one. And they always assume that it's not really a problem to get a place at a school or a nursery in Berlin. And then they encounter greater challenges because suddenly there are no nursery places available in the region at short notice, etc. Many feel left alone because the institutions do not have the capacity to support them and they simply do not know who to ask when they need to enroll their child in school or who to ask when they need a family reunification visa and would like to obtain one. In Berlin, we do this. People can contact us and we then find the right process for the school or nursery place and also liaise with the necessary authorities. Though on the one hand, this is not intended to relieve the institutions of this responsibility. We don't want to take over a service, but we want to fill the gap until the institutions can do it themselves. That's definitely the case. When it comes to careers, almost all of the nursing professionals I have spoken to say that career development is important. However, this also requires transparent communication. What is expected at this new level? Or when we talk about practical training, what is expected of a practical trainer? What skills do I need? How do I get them? And if it doesn't work out, as in the original quote at the beginning, then it needs to be explained clearly why not. I think that happens far too little. And it doesn't matter whether I'm international or national. There's far too little communication. We need this, that, and the other. And we have now selected the person for the application. But if you have this and that, then you'll be in next time because then you'll have the qualifications we need to become a practical instructor or to obtain this qualification. So it's always assumed that you know all this yourself. And I often wonder where you're supposed to know that instead of saying, okay, if you have all that, then it's no problem. So it's fine, and somehow get away from this, then they can sue us. And yes, I think that's always an excuse, just like data protection is always an excuse for not communicating transparently.
Yes, it's used a lot. That's true.
Exactly. Careers are important and sometimes really very important. I have to say that there are many who say they would like to have career prospects. They want to know what they can do after being recognized as a nursing professional, how they can develop further. They also want to know about the path to higher education. These are things that international nursing professionals are very interested in. Can I still go to university? What does it take? Etc.
In your opinion, what actually needs to change on a larger structural level or even on a political level? Because we've been talking a bit about the facilities and that's where the action is, but there are other levels that also influence many structures. What needs to change there also with regard to the integration of international nursing professionals?
As I said, I have to say that Berlin is pretty well set up in terms of integration management. What is now also being discussed in the larger political context is funding opportunities. This means that many long-term care facilities often do not have the resources, either in terms of personnel or finances, to undergo a process such as the one in Frankfurt. Incidentally, this is also done through a funding structure. In other words, I don't think the facility would have embarked on this process if this funding structure did not exist. And that's just the way it is. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist in Berlin. The federal states vary greatly in terms of what is funded and what is not. That's really important. It helps to anchor integration better when there are parallel funding structures in place to support it. There are nationwide structures, some of which are more complicated, some of which are simpler. We also provide further assistance in this area as BBeFaP, but this is really something that needs to be addressed. And it's not just a care issue, it's an issue for all industries, because all industries have international staff or will increasingly have them. And that means that this is definitely an area where more needs to be done, where more can be done.
Where do you see the biggest levers for change in the short and long term?
In the short term, I would say that we have a very good handle on things in Berlin. We are now working on becoming even more transparent and highlighting support structures even more clearly. We are currently working on a website that will explain the contact points and procedures for both the facilities and the nursing staff. And we are considering whether we want to create a digital telephone directory for nursing staff in 3 languages, where you can find counseling centers or support structures relatively quickly, because that is such an important issue. So in the short term, that is something that will be done and is necessary. In the long term, it is important that the institutions establish integration management. As I said, management needs to know that this is something we have to do. It needs to be incorporated into the facilities in the long term. And it's not just these facilities that can be put under political pressure to have this like a seal of approval or a good employer label or whatever it might look like. But it shouldn't just happen in large clinics. It has to happen all the way down to the smallest long-term care facilities. And of course, it has to be adapted so that not everyone has a large integration management system. That's not logical, but adapted to the structure of the institution. Something like this should actually be in place everywhere. That would be the long-term perspective.
I was just thinking about whether it might even make a lot of sense to embed this in local structures where, for example, different cities have different ethnic groups or backgrounds, because there are still neighborhoods where different groups of people simply gather. But then you actually have the problem of getting in there, or there aren't enough care services. That means you could actually use this staff to reach these groups of people and offer them further support, because they may actually be doing a lot within their family circle, as you said earlier. But there is still a lack of professional support. And if there is simply a language barrier, and then that could also mean that people from abroad have better access to these people. So every local authority would probably have an interest in that. You just have to be aware of it and steer things a little.
Exactly, that's what I mean. We use all the skills that all employees bring to the table. And I don't just mean that a Syrian nurse can explain to another Syrian nurse what a technical device is called in Arabic. Of course, this would also be very useful in outpatient care, where it would be helpful to speak the languages that people speak at home, in their neighborhoods or family homes or wherever. This even extends to translations, which are necessary for family members in tragic situations. For example, let's use everything that a person brings with them in a way that is good for our patients and residents.
Debora, that pretty much brings us to the end. I think we've covered the topic quite well. Is there anything else that's on your mind or that you'd like to add?
Actually, I'm quite happy. I think it's a really important topic. I hope we can achieve this, that we have institutions that take this to heart, that expectation management for international nursing professionals is a very important part of sustainable integration into their workplace, and that they accept the support currently offered by the BBeFaP to establish this. That is my heartfelt wish. Now let's see if we can keep it going.
Exactly. We will definitely link to it in the show notes. So anyone who is interested in taking a closer look or perhaps needs further advice is welcome to contact you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Debora, for explaining everything so clearly and shedding light on the topic of expectation management in general, the problems it can cause, and how we can deal with them in a solution-oriented way to improve integration and at the same time provide better care. Thank you very much. If you are interested, please feel free to contact us. You can either do so on our community board, which you will find on our homepage, or subscribe to our newsletter so that you don't miss anything. Thank you to everyone who listened, and best wishes to Francis. I hope you are feeling better. Bye for now. Ciao.
Thank you, Christian. Bye.